this computer. And let's start the screen share and let the big old battle cartoon begin. Okay. Everybody see it okay? Hebrews chapter 12. No, I don't want you guys up there. I want you guys like this and over here. Okay, there is 3, 4, 6, and 9, 10, 12, 13, 14. There's everybody. Okay, hello everybody. We are in chapter 12, which begins with a big old therefore. And again, what's the therefore? Therefore, the therefore calls to mind everything that we looked at in chapter 11, which is the by faith chapter. And so chapter 12 builds off of where chapter 11 left off, which is basically the Old Testament people of faith did great things from their faith. And because our faith is based on not only what God has promised to do, but also on what he has done, that we should be even more bold, courageous, confident in our faith. We have no excuse. And you're going to see this continued law and gospel, maybe not commingling, but the author definitely encourages us with the faith that we've been given, the acts of God that drive us to put our hope and our trust in him. But he also will use them as a warning that because we've been given so much more that the people of the Old Testament have, ignoring what God has done is going to bring with it greater consequences potentially than what the people in the Old Testament suffered for their unbelief. Okay, so therefore, chapter 11, people of faith, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, again, we talked about how the author of Hebrews begins with telling you in great detail about these people of faith, going into detail about Abel and Enoch and Noah and Moses, and in great detail about these people. And then he adds, and they're the ones that are up close that you can see close to you. And then, and like the second row behind them or the third row or back in the crowd, more categories of people that did things by faith. You can't really see them in great detail. And then he sprinkles in the midst of those people who suffered for their faith. So he's not a theologian of glory. He's definitely a theologian of the cross. Before being a theologian of the cross was cool in the Reformation. And that's the spectrum of people of faith, right? So that's the great cloud of witnesses. Some were tortured and killed for their faith. Others lived out their faith in very bold, courageous, and historically significant ways. But they all live by faith. So what does that mean for us? What's the practical application for us being surrounded by all the Old Testament people of faith? Let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So there's plenty to unpack here. We already did the therefore. And what the author talks about here is he's making an analogy to running. And the analogy he uses is actually pretty cool. One that those of us that, like me, I'm trying to get back into running because I don't want to be a fatty McFatterson the rest of my life. I need to trim down. So I'm getting back into running very slowly because I don't have a choice. So running, when you run, it's good to have your eyes on the goal, which when you run in the gym is the clock in front of you, counting down the time you have left. It's good to run with your eyes on the goal. Where am I running, right? If you can see the finish line off in the distance, focus on that. Running, I think the analogy he uses is intentional. Running is not fun. And you can prove this by next time you're at the gym, go over and look at the people that are on the treadmills running and see if any of them are smiling. They're not smiling. They're gasping for air, right? They have that look on their face. Running is not fun. Running is hard. And so what he says is you need to get rid of, but running is good for you. See, so this is the analogy to faith. And what he says at the beginning is lay aside every weight. Well, when you're a runner, what's the one thing that can slow you down, right? Extra weight, right? So get rid of your rucksack that you've been running with. Get rid of the ankle weights. Get rid of the middle age spread, right? Get rid of the things that make running hard. Right? So when it comes to our faith, get the things out of your life that make practicing your faith difficult. Right? Why should your faith have to compete with the filth and the unbelief of the things of this age? Get rid of them, right? So with running, you wear the right clothes, the right shoes, you stay hydrated, you don't carry heavy things, maybe some pre-workout and some PEDs to make things fun, and find something, right? He says, fix your eyes on Jesus. When you run, find something to motivate you while you're running, right? For running, keep your eyes, it's like a playlist. And so I was putting this together, it was like, in a weird way, Jesus is my spiritual running playlist, right? Like when I run, I don't like to listen to myself gasping for air, because that's like not a pleasant thing. So I put the earphones in and I listen to upbeat music, right, to get you through. And the author of Hebrews 8, of course, didn't have MP3 players back then or iPods or anything like that. So the analogy is, what do you do to occupy your mind in your time when you're running? Well, you fix your eyes on Jesus. That's what's going to motivate you. It's like a really good playlist. And yes, Alyssa, I got your text. I'll bring the computer home so you can tweak your playlist for your fitness class tomorrow. That got recorded. That's awkward. Okay. Does that make sense, what he's doing here with the analogy to running, and how and the analogy to how we run today and what that looks like for our walk with Christ? Does that all make sense?
Yes.
Okay. The Bears did lose in overtime, Rich. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, they did. They did. Right as
Yeah.
you were coming online, they lost.
Thanks for bringing it up.
Oh, with about a minute left.
Who were they playing?
The New Orleans Saints.
Well, I had the Saints defense, so that's okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, we had home builders this afternoon, so we were in a Christian thing from 2:00 until 4:00, and so Alyssa couldn't check the Vikings, I couldn't check the Steelers, and so as soon as it ends, right after the closing prayer, we're all on the phone looking at, and so things went well. So that's 1 to 2. The idea of the analogy of running a race and having something to motivate you while running, and getting rid of things that slow you down when you run. And in the spiritual race with Christ, the thing we focus on is Jesus, and the things that would cling to us, that would slow us down, are our sins, are focusing on that which is not Christ, different worldviews, different practices, things that we put into our minds, things that we see, things that we hear that would take us away from Christ, slow us down in our race of faith. Okay. So like a marathon runner, like, so Christians, there's that, how close can I get to the line of sin? Like, when does it cross over to sin, and how close can I get to the line? That's like a runner saying, how many donuts can I eat before I can't run anymore? Like, what are you doing? Long distance, you're not supposed to eat donuts. Like, just don't do it. All right, consider him, right? So really focus on Jesus, right? As you're running this race of faith, he's your spiritual playlist, right? That's the thing you're focusing on. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. The admonition, it's admonition and encouragement, right? Like, you should really do this, and you should really do this. Goes from leading us to move on from the former way of life we had without Christ, to live in the kingdom by faith where Christ reigns. That's what he's trying to get us to do as we run the race of faith, moving from it's sanctification, from being a person who acts and thinks like the world does, to being someone who acts and thinks like Jesus. He's reminding us, though, that whatever difficulties we may face for living out in our life the faith of Jesus, or faith in Jesus, whatever we suffer in no way compares to the suffering Jesus experienced. In other words, Jesus doesn't ask us to do anything he was not willing to do. And in following Jesus, we're not going to be treated or end up any worse than he was or did. Right? So in that instance, Jesus does absolutely lead by example. And that's the that's one of the marks of a good leader, that they're not going to ask you to do anything they haven't already done. So any suffering that we experience, any hardships we face for our faith in Christ, he suffered worse for doing not the same thing, for doing it better, right? So, for example, our faith may cost us a job, it may cost us income, it may so on and so forth, financial consequences. Jesus had no place to lay his head, right? Our faith may alienate us from our friends, from our family. Well, when Jesus comes back home, remember his family members, the people from his hometown, they don't want to have anything to do with him. His mother does, but his mother and his brothers are standing outside when he's preaching, and they're, whoa, who is this guy? His hometown doesn't want anything to do with him. No prophet is accepted in his hometown. And of course, he is rejected and abandoned by everyone in his death. And so again, he's not asking us to do anything that he already hasn't done as we follow him. So what's going on here is that the first two verses deal with the internal struggle against sin, right? That's throw off the sin that entangles. Those are the things that can slow you down, right, internally. And verses 3 to 4 deal with the external struggle against persecution. So those are the two main things that can prevent us from being by faith people: the internal struggle against sin and external persecution. Does that make sense? It's all kind of common sense. But anyway, and have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. He's quoting Proverbs here. And so now the author of Hebrews gets into how we should understand when we do suffer for being people of faith. We can view it as the devil, the world, and the people of the world don't like me because I'm following Jesus, and they're going to make my life difficult. And from an external perspective, that's exactly right. However, the author of Hebrews says that in, with, and under that, God is using the devil, he is using the world, and he is using people who don't like you because you're following Jesus to treat you like a father treats his children by disciplining you. So that Christ actually has a positive purpose for the hardships that we face externally for our faith in Christ. Again, he's not talking about, this isn't the struggle against sin that he's talking about in the first two verses. God doesn't try to tempt us with sin, but rather this has to do with the external persecution we face in various forms for being a person of faith. And he says, behind this is God using this to discipline us as sons. All right. This is not, though, and this is something that bugs me because I find myself doing it, and so I don't like it. When we think that just because as Christians, when things are hard, that it's persecution. Like, no, non-Christians have hard times too. That's not being persecuted for your faith. And what the author here is talking about is specifically hardships that we face as a consequence or as a result of living out our faith. If that makes sense. So this isn't every time something is hard in your life, this is God disciplining me as a son or daughter. This is specific examples of when our faith results in persecution and hardship. Okay. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. And I think you can include in her sons and daughters. He's not saying, you women take a hike, this isn't for you. He's not doing that. He's just picking one of the genders and running with it. But women, same thing, sons, daughters. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. So faith looks at faith-based hardships differently than the world. Instead of looking at them like necessary painful things we endure because we have to, we see them as proof that God is shaping and forming us into the image of Christ, as proof of our adoption into his family as sons and daughters. So if I wasn't experiencing hardships because of my faith, that should be more weird to us than then I am experiencing hardships for my faith. And at this point, it becomes once again very clear that the prosperity gospel has no room in the church. Right? And so the prosperity gospel is one extreme on the spectrum, right, where you don't want to be over there. And the other extreme that you also don't want to be, you don't want to run around looking to be persecuted, right, to prove that you're God's son or daughter, right? He's saying that when these persecutions come, and they will inevitably come as you live out your faith, because the world doesn't know what to do with you, just know that behind it, God has a divine plan and purpose to discipline you as sons. And discipline here is not discipline like spanking your kids and sending them to their room. Discipline here is producing, God is using this as discipline to produce resilience that results in godliness, right? Spiritual resilience resulting in godliness. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. And you're saying this guy does not live in the 21st century, right? Kids don't respond too well to discipline today as they should. Thomas, are you still listening? Alyssa turned off the camera. All right.
Sarah and me are.
Sarah, is this true? Do you like it when your earthly father disciplines you?
Do you like when you get disciplined?
Not really.
I didn't like it either. But back then there was this understanding that when your parents discipline you, they're doing it for your benefit. They're trying to develop character. They're trying to develop habits that need discipline in order to be produced. And so he says, well, since we enjoyed that discipline, shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and life? We should enjoy the heavenly discipline that our Heavenly Father gives us through the means of persecution from the world for when we act out on our faith. They disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, right? And so it's funny, under this is and they didn't always know what they were doing, right? They didn't always get it right. And there Sarah would agree wholeheartedly with that. They disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them. And we enjoyed it. It was good for us. When our human parents disciplined us for things that had a temporal or short-term effect, and they didn't always discipline us properly, we thought it was good. But God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. So the purpose of divine discipline, one, God always disciplines us in the right way, and he's disciplining us for things that have an eternal duration. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. And Sarah, of course, should be nodding there in agreement that discipline at the time when you go to your room, when you have to when she makes her bed on her own, discipline is not pleasant at the time, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Okay. Again, God's discipline that we're talking about here is not when things are hard or don't go the way we want them to, but rather when we experience persecution directly related to the practicing of our faith. So, for example, if we as a congregation chose to not stop worshiping in the pandemic when there were no gatherings of 10 or more, and we said, forget that, we're still doing our thing, and the authorities came and somehow there's a fine involved or something like that, that's the persecution it's talking about, right? Things like that. Yeah. Therefore, lift your drooping hands. Getting back to the running analogy here. Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. So again, the analogy of running. Now that we know the purpose behind the difficulties of practicing our faith, that behind it, God is working to discipline us in the ways of righteousness. The thinking here is that the more we are persecuted for our faith, the more faithful we will become. We should enjoy the pains of running the race of faith. Because part of running that race of faith are the persecutions, is the discipline that will come our way. And so we see here that running the race of faith does not cause our lame. So lame is kind of, it's a weird word. Lame is the midpoint. And so our hands and our feet are we have drooping hands and weak knees, right? And that's described as lame. So lame is where we are here. And we can either move in the direction of strengthening that which is lame, or we can move in the direction where it would get even worse, where what is lame becomes put out of joint. In other words, it becomes useless. And so what he's saying is, so for example, your first trip to the gym, right? And for me, it's weightlifting. So the first trip to the gym and you lift weights. And getting back to my buddy John, who his car blew up. Such a nice Mustang. It was so fast. It was so awesome. And he did it all himself. Where John and I really bonded, he was a member of the church. They had quadruplets. They had one son, and then like 18 months later, they had quadruplets. And the whole church rallied around. They moved into the parsonage, and people took turns at night, like feeding and changing diapers, and the church rallied around them, and it was fantastic. And by the time we got there, there were no more diapers. So that was good timing on our part, on the Lord's part. He delayed us getting there till the diapers were gone. But I got to know John, great guy. And so we bonded over, we would go work out together. And this was back in our 30s. We would like go to the gym from 9:30 until 11. I mean, it was late. And the first time I took him, he hadn't worked out since high school. And he's a couple years older than I am. And of course, his first workout, he wants to go hard, right? Like, murr. And he was sore for 10 days. And so he had a decision to make. So now he's lame, right? He can either say, to heck with this. This is stupid. I don't need to be, I have 5 kids at home. And then his body, he would get old and decrepit and his body would fall out of joint. Or he can say, no, this hurts, I'm lame, but I'm going to keep doing this and get stronger. And he became a beast. Like the dude just kept lifting. And now it's his oldest son, they go work out together. It's fantastic. And that's what he's saying here. Look, your race of faith, you're right here. And you're experiencing some persecution. Your hands are drooping. Your knees are weak, right? But you got to keep going. But keep going, right? Because over time, as you get used to working out, as you get used to, the analogy here is running, your arms are going to be strengthened by it. You're going to get in rhythm. Your knees are going to be strengthened. Your legs are going to get strong. And running the race of faith is going to be easier the more you do it. Like I'm sure Alyssa, the first time she did body step, it almost killed her. And now she can do body step 7 months pregnant, no big deal. She's still teaching aerobics. Can you believe that? I can't do aerobics without being pregnant, and she's 7 months pregnant doing aerobics. It's fantastic.
But I look a little silly. I told my class if I get too distracting looking, that they need to tell me, and I'll get a sub.
But it's this idea of the more you do it, the better you get at it, the stronger you become. If you don't do it, your muscles and stuff atrophies. And he's making that analogy to running the race of faith. Right. So I guess the question then becomes for us. So we see each other's 15 squares right here. We're all running the race of faith. There's some squares with more than one person in. When you see someone running the race of faith, what do? When you see someone running a race that they need to win, you don't stick your foot out and trip them, right? What do?
You encourage them.
You encourage them, right? And that can look like many things, right? It can mean like running alongside of them. It can mean handing them water or Gatorade or some other performance-enhancing drug as they're running, right? Whatever it takes. When I ran the Chicago Marathon, one of the awesome things about that race is that the entire marathon, the street is lined with people who are cheering you on. And I thought, like, sure, they'll be there for like the professional marathon runners who are trying to break 2 hours, and like, but then when I come huffing along, like they all have better things to do than watch, some guy huff and puff his way to 26.2 miles. But they were still there. And I was told, too late, but I was told by people there that you want to write your name on your jersey, because you get a number. Like, you want to put something on it that has your name, because the people that had their names on their thing, the people on the side of the road, they'd be calling out people by name. You go, name of person, and it was just super, super encouraging. And in the same way we run the race of faith, we have to ask ourselves, as people, as I'm running wherever God has put me in this pack of runners, some are running slower, some are faster, but as I am passed by them, or as I pass them, or as they pass me, as we're running this race of faith together, am I tripping them or am I encouraging them? Because this is a race that we must win, right? And the race is hard enough, and we should be encouraging those who are running the race with us, right? Not pointing out, hey, you got the wrong kind of shoes, but rather encourage them. Yeah, Fred.
Very quickly, I've run Chicago 3 times. And the second time, Levon and I ran, we had a group, and we had our names across the front. And it really was very encouraging. Even when you're dragging, people calling your name who have no clue who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that really did help. And Levon and I ran the second one time together. And it was good.
It's quite an experience.
Oh, it's all ethnic neighborhoods. It's very flat. It's very nice.
Mm-hmm. When I ran, it was cold, and that was because the year before it was really hot and people died, and I was like, that'll be me. But it was like, it never got above 40 degrees. It was perfect. The Lord knew what I needed. I didn't know you guys ran it. That's awesome. Several times, huh?
A long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Not anymore.
So it said, and this is what it says. Like, how do you encourage one another? Strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. So peace with everyone, having to do with those who persecute us for our faith, right? Try to strive for peace with them, which we know is what the Lord, so these people, right, that are chastising us for our faith, we don't have to get angry at them, because we know the Lord is using them to discipline us in righteousness and faithfulness. So in a way, by persecuting us, they're actually helping us in our faith. And then in holiness, right, that which God creates through our being persecuted, right, by the people with whom we are striving to be at peace. So when the people of the world strike out against us for being Christians, we don't fight back with the same weapons they use. We rather strive for peace with them. Right? We should want to be disciplined by God through the persecution of those outside the faith, but we should not seek to bring it on ourselves, like by being jerks. Rather, we should try to live at peace with them. And so there's a tension there. Let's keep going. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled, that no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. So what you have here, fails to obtain the grace of God, that would be unbelief. Root of bitterness that causes trouble and defilement. You have those who are sexually immoral and those who are unholy. And what's interesting is when you read something like the book of 1 Corinthians, right, and maybe we should read this, but Paul gets into tell you what he says. I need to get the bookmark here for Hebrews, flip over to 1 Corinthians, because we treat Christians who persecute us for our faith, who put stumbling blocks in our way, differently than we treat non-Christians. And right. So he says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 9. I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. But then he has to clarify. He says, you guys took this the wrong way. He says, not at all meaning the sexually immoral of this world, or the greedy and swindlers or idolaters. Since then, you would need to go out of the world. So he's saying, look, people who don't know Christ are going to behave like they don't know Christ. And you can't expect them to behave like they know Christ, because they don't. And you're going to have interactions with these people. You can't avoid pagans. And you should, yeah, Fred.
One quick thing, just as a reminder, Esau is how bad Esau was.
Mhm.
Esau was father of the Edomites. Herod was an Edomite. So you go straight from Esau down to Herod. That's who Herod was, these same things.
Mhm. Yeah, he doesn't get treated very kindly by the Esau. By the so Paul is writing about how you can't not hang out with pagans because they're behaving like pagans. They're going to do that, and you're going to get persecuted. They're not going to treat you well. But it's different with Christians, right? Don't associate with these people. You'd have to go out of the world, right? It's a wonderful wordplay there. But now I am writing you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother, right? Who claims to be a Christian, if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, reveler, drunkard, or swindler, not even to eat with such a one. And so what Paul is saying is, look, there's going to be people who, when you're running your race of faith, are going to try to trip you. And if they're pagans, that's just what they're going to do. Pagan's going to pagan. But when people who claim to be Christians are trying to trip you, you don't need to put up with that. That's not okay, right? And so we, in a weird way, we have this very forgiving, understanding mindset when it comes to when unbelievers come at me for my faith, when they make life hard for me for my faith. God is using that to discipline me as his own child that has benefits for me long term. But when brothers and sisters in Christ do that, I don't need to put up with it. And they need, we don't need to put up with it. And so there is this tension there between, we actually put up with more from those on the outside than we do on those on the inside, if that makes sense. All right, so that's that. Now back to this. All right. God, the author now turns to things in the church that can cause us to not run our race with perseverance. We looked at things outside the church and how God is behind them, leading us to righteousness. But God does not have a purpose for division, bitterness, immorality, or unholiness inside the church. That does not serve a purpose. See, even though it can be the same thing, the same practice, right? An unbeliever may make fun of you for, I don't know, pick something up, by going a Zoom Bible study on Sunday night. Man, you should be, weekend's coming to an end. You should be drinking and watching football. What are you doing going to Zoom Bible study? And you go, you're God's using this to sharpen me. That's great. But if a Christian said that to you, what are you doing Zoom Bible study on Sunday night? Come on. Not okay. There is no divine purpose behind that. See what I mean? All right. For you know that afterward, this is about Esau, that when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. Again, the story of Esau and Jacob. And I kind of have a soft spot for Esau, right? So he comes out and he is the firstborn. He should be, the guy. But God, I haven't chosen you. I've chosen Jacob. Well, Jacob's a schmuck. And Jacob's a little light. So Esau goes out and he's the hunter, right? He is daddy's favorite, and Jacob is mommy's favorite. And so Esau goes out and he's hunting all day. He's trying to get he's getting food for the family. And he comes back after hunting all day, and the guy is starving. He's starving. And instead of saying, hey, brother, thanks for going out and hunting all day and providing for us, Jacob says, I got this stew here. I'm just not going to give it to you out of brotherly love. No, 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 no. I'm going to put a price on it. And the price is your birthright. Now, there's two ways of looking at this. Esau says, I mean, if I don't do this, I'm going to starve to death, right? And there's the one sense that, well, maybe he's right. Maybe there is no other food around and it's this or it's nothing. Or maybe Esau is in the moment, he's being reckless. Oh, I better, and he sells his birthright for some stew that his brother made, like kind of the worst deal ever, right? But then you look at Esau, and Jacob eventually has to leave the home because of how he deceived Esau. And then he goes to Laban, a distant relative, and marries Laban's daughters. And then he is less than honest with Laban. And so he has to leave Laban, and the only place to go is back home. And so he has to face Esau. And there's this great, it's a big Old Testament story. And Jacob's afraid that Esau's going to kill him because the last time he saw Esau, he had swindled him out of his birthright, his inheritance. And so he tries to appease Esau, and Esau goes, what's all this for? And there's this beautiful scene where Esau meets Jacob, and he goes, oh my gosh, you got married? You have kids? This is wonderful. This is a great day. It's so good to see you, brother. And Esau, it's a big puzzlement to me because the way he's portrayed in Genesis, he's not a bad guy. At worst, he's reckless, right, with his birthright. But he comes across very favorably as compared to Jacob. And I think the purpose of that, you could say, is there's more to the story than just what's recorded in Scripture. And the purpose of presenting Esau the way Scripture does is to say, look, Jacob is saved by grace. If it's an all by works, Esau has him beat hand over foot, but it's by grace, right? But the way Scripture talks about him and the man he is, it is somewhat confusing. All right. But he is rash, and he does sell his birthright, and he can't get it back. He had his chance and he blew it. And so this is where we get into the seriousness of the faith that we have been given. And the chapter kind of turns here. And now that we've kind of been going through some really encouraging stuff, and now it kind of turns to take this seriously. The author says, for you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and the voice whose words made the hearers beg no further message be spoken to them, for they could not endure the order that was given. If a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses says, I tremble with fear. And so what he's doing here is he's saying, look, this is how God presented himself in the Old Testament, specifically at Mount Sinai to Moses and the Israelites, right? And he's going back to that, the Israelites in the wilderness and how they all died in the wilderness, that they saw the manifestation of God's glory, they received the covenant and all that stuff, and they still fell away and all perished in the wilderness. And so he's going back to that and saying, look, the Old Testament people, the way God revealed himself to them, scared the living daylights out of them. It was terrifying. It was glorious. It was holy. He says, even Moses said, I tremble with fear. Right? This is not tender Jesus, meek and mild. The point is, he revealed himself in terrifying ways, but the people still responded with faith. Now, the Israelites at Mount Sinai necessarily did not. But again, this isn't just the Mount Sinai revelation of God. And throughout the Old Testament history, there are people who, having had God revealed to them in this way, lived out their faith in bold, significant ways. And yet the way God manifested himself is very different than how he came to people in the incarnation of Christ. And yet they still lived out their faith. How much more should we, to whom the Lord has revealed himself in the face of Jesus? Right? So if they were able to live out their faith after God came to them in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers in this way, how much more should we? So that's how God revealed himself in the Old Testament. So terrifying was the sight, Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, not Mount Sinai. You've come to a better mountain and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. So he's comparing Old Testament, God reveals himself in a very scary, terrifying way from Mount Sinai, and Old Testament people respond in faith. We have all these wonderful things, especially how he reveals himself in Jesus, right? And so how much more should we be living out our faith because of how God has come to us? In other words, but there's a warning coming here that it's one thing when God comes in a terrifying way, right? You know, I better take this seriously. But when God comes to us in grace and humility and love, we might be tempted to say, oh, that's really cute. You know, yeah, I'll get around to it sometime. And the author of Hebrews is saying, we have no excuse to not respond to God's revelation to us in Jesus. That makes sense? That just because he comes in humility and just because he comes in gentleness and love and grace does not make the revelation of God in Jesus any less serious than how he revealed himself on Mount Sinai. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth. And now I think he's getting into the people that warned him on earth are the Old Testament prophets who had to remind the people, hey, this covenant that God's given us, this priesthood, this temple, these sacrifices that God gave us from Mount Sinai, and that very terrifying thing, you need to, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven, that is Jesus. So if you ignored the prophets to your own peril and they were on earth, the one that came from heaven, Jesus, you better not ignore his message. So we're getting a little admonition here. At that time, right? So again, why? Why should I take this that seriously? Well, at that time, his voice shook the earth. And I think what he means by shook the earth there is, Mount Sinai, the earth did shake. But the idea of shaking, right? So you have a tree and you shake the tree, and what happens to all the dead things in the tree? They fall off, right? Especially this time you shake a tree with the dead leaves, they all fall off. Excuse me. And that is, I think, what he's saying. God's acts in the Old Testament, his acts of judgment, are a form of shaking, right? To get rid of the dead stuff, right? So that what is living may remain. The whole idea of a remnant. Yet once more, I will shake not only the earth, but the heavens. So the manifold judgments of God in the Old Testament foreshadows eschatological judgment or judgment day. Now that Christ has come, the only thing left for God to do is to judge the world. And that judgment will make all the acts of God's judgment in the past, by the way, including the flood, pale in comparison. There's a reason why Jesus spends 2 chapters in Matthew teaching his disciples about the coming judgment. He is going to shake the earth one more time. And when he does, everything that's not living is going to fall down to the ground and be taken away. That's what we're getting to here. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken. So again, you're shaking and things fall off the tree, right? And you're shaking, it falls to the ground, and then they're taken away. indicates the removal of things that are shaken, that is, the things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. So when you shake a tree, the things that don't fall off are the things that are attached, are the things that are still alive. Jesus talks about this in John with the vine and the branches. So we talked about the resurrection in church today, which shouldn't come much of a surprise, and about what the chapter 7 of our lives will be like, what it will be like after Jesus comes back. And yet here's another image that is used for what happens in that day. God will shake creation. That which is dead will fall off and be taken away, and only that which is living will remain. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And thus, let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. And this kind of calls to mind Jesus' teaching about the wise and foolish builders, right? Wise man built his house upon the rock, right? And instead of shaking, right, the analogy there is the rains fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on the house that both the houses that both the wise and the foolish builder built. And in the end, the foolish man's house is shaken to the ground. The wise man's house built on the rock stands. And many people misinterpret that wise and foolish builders to be that the storm is the storms of life. And if you build your house on Jesus, when the storms of life come, you'll do just fine. And if you're not a Christian, when the storms of life come, you're going to be swept away. Experience bears out that that's not true. There's plenty of Christians who get the storms of life do terrible damage to them. And there's plenty of non-Christians who skate through life relatively unscathed. But the storm that Jesus speaks of there in Matthew 7 is the final judgment. And the rock is his teaching, which largely has to do with who he is and who we are because of him. And then being on the path that leads to life, the narrow path. So here again, you have the analogy not of a flood that's coming, but rather of things that are shaken. Okay. Cool. We have 1 week to go, and we're going to do this. Come back to squares of Zoom people. Any questions on that from Hebrews chapter 12? So as we look to transition after next week from Hebrews to the parables of Jesus, what do you think of the pace that we go? So for example, like we went through a lot tonight. Would you rather less detail and cover more territory, or let's slow down and have more of a discussion, and maybe if we don't get through a chapter or even a whole parable every week, that's okay. Let's slow down, more discussion, and understand it better. Which one do you prefer?
Very dark away.
I prefer the pace we're going.
Not too fast, not too slow, just right.
Well, you can look at it and you can take some notes and you can actually think about it. Sometimes it goes a little too fast. I really lose track. That's me.
Yeah, no faster than this.
Okay.
I would agree.
I agree.
Because I mean, there is more in depth we could do. Because I don't feel like we really dug super deep on a lot of the stuff. But if you dig too deep, then you get buried in the details and you never.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Study on Jonah.
Details, but
I think it depends on the context, as some things require more in-depth and we'll have more questions. So, that's up to you as you're going through, whether it's going to be a lot in one day or a little bit.
I like the details.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind a
agree.
little more in depth, but this pace is fine too.
I think with the parables, we might naturally go more in depth because some of them aren't that long. And so to fill an hour, you got to fill it with something. And discussion about fast cars only takes you so far. So slowing down and maybe going in more detail may come more naturally to a study on the parables.
I would think that the question of depth will happen as you're going through it. You'll get to, and people will ask more questions. You'll drill down as they're asking questions. So you need to be prepared for that, but not always speak about everything in great depth, because we'll all ask, as we want more information on a certain parable.
What might be nice about parables too is like saying a week in advance, we're going to look at this parable next week. So kind of get familiar with it and come. And if you don't, that's fine too. But you'd have the opportunity to say, just like with this, like you can read and study Hebrews 12 before we studied it. But also for the parables, this is the one we're going to do next. And then when we get to parables, so I took a class at Pittsburgh on the parables, and most of the class was on learning what a parable is. And do you want to do that, or do you just want to jump in? Or do you want the intro? This is a parable. These are what different people say parables are, and all that. There might be something to be learned there, like how do you interpret them, this, that, and different ways to interpret them.
I think you should do the intro.
We're doing the intro.
Because I've heard you do it before, and I still don't quite catch it sometimes.
Yeah.
I would think that understanding the time and the place, what a parable really is, literary device, I think that'd help add context to what we're reading.
Right. And that's hard because, I mean, opinions vary as to what is a parable, and do Matthew, Mark, and Luke agree on exactly what a parable is? And there are some instances of things that Jesus says, and Luke will say, this is a parable, and you read it and go, that's not a parable. And Luke goes, I'm the one who's inspired here. It's a parable. You go, oh, okay, let's put our parable hat on, and then other things that you want to be a parable. Like, so for example, in Luke will always tip you off in some way as to what's coming if it's a parable. Right? He lets you know. So if he doesn't tip you off, I think you have to say what's going on here is not a parable, right? Good Samaritan's not a parable. He does not set off the Good Samaritan as a parable. And yet, it often gets read as a parable, and the interpretations of it are, if I'm the one that teaches that, because Coop's going to teach some of these, if I get to teach Good Samaritan, we may do it as a parable just to have some fun, and we can argue over whether or not it's actually a parable, but we're studying the Bible, so it's all good. Some of the early church interpretations of the parable or the Good Samaritan they're tremendous, right? The 2 coins that he gives to the innkeeper are the Old and the New Testament, or they are the law and the gospel, or they are, the sacraments. I mean, you get into some really, really, really interesting stuff. So anyway, but we're not doing that now. We're doing Hebrews 13 next week, and then we're jumping into the parables. So cool.
And by the way, even though the sermon was a little bit longer than normal, it was all information that I felt that kind of came together. We needed it all. There wasn't anything when I look back at it
Right.
that we could have gone without having the whole picture. So the longer sermon, I was okay with that.
It was
And
Super good sermon. I
Yeah,
thought it was
wait.
super good.
when you taped it, did you do the seal thing?
I did not do that at 9:00.
That
But-
was priceless.
But okay, so the gate did record theirs, and I'm like, this is the one chance I have with them. So I have, they can't. So I did do the seal thing for the gate. So if it's on their website, then
Yeah.
I think he figured because it was his birthday, he could go a little longer and no one would say anything.
That's all right.
Yeah. I wasn't watching my time. I wasn't timing you. I thought it was great.
I
Well,
did too.
and that music at the end, that 4-piece at the end, that was tremendous. I thought they did a great. RK's really got. She's found a way to navigate special music in a pandemic when you really can't do the chancel choir. Is really good. And also, did you notice? This is where I'm a nerd, but Jerusalem the Golden probably ties with me and For All the Saints for the best All Saints song. And it's my birthday, so I got to pick Jerusalem the Golden. But if you notice, in the new Maroon hymnal, the words are markedly different than they are in the blue hymnal. And the blue hymnal, I think the words, they sing better and they're more accurate. So if you're a big hymnal person, just know that Jerusalem the Golden, the words changed a lot between hymnals. And it's the same song. Why are we changing the words? That guy.
That was my dad's favorite hymn, I guess, and I could never really understand. Then I started looking at the words, and then I could now I can understand. But like you say, the words are really changed.
Mm-hmm. I mean, German to English is probably a bigger change, but not by much. I mean, it's different, and I prefer greatly the blue hymnal. And I'd never heard that hymn until I went to seminary, and they sang it in chapel. I think it was around All Saints, and it was so all men in a chapel with big booming echoing, and everyone were pastors, so we're singing loud whether we can or not. And more people there sang like Coop than like me, so it sounded like music. And after that, I mean, it brings you to tears. And after that, I was like, I can't believe I've never heard this song, and it's one of the best. So Alyssa, Jerusalem the Golden, okay, that gets into the funeral. Okay, thank you.
Okay, two things. When we went out of church and I was telling all the people,
Uh-oh,
Uh-oh. She froze.
pull through.
Froze up.
Yep.
Come on, sticky computer. What's the internet protocol for how long you wait for someone to unfreeze? We could be here a while.
Spencer, maybe.
it was a great,
Can you, Levon, you froze up right when you started talking. Can you say everything you said again?
oh, okay. I told all the people when I was walking out of the 8 o'clock service that it was really a great sermon and music that they had to be prepared for, but they would stick with it and love it. But also, I cried during that first hymn, and I want to know why you ran the Chicago Marathon.
I get choked up on Jerusalem the Golden as well, and I can't put my finger on it. It's the tune. It encourages you to get louder with it because you're in there, but you're singing about death, and you're singing about how God brings us to Himself even in death, and it's overwhelming. Chicago. Okay, so I was in Lincoln, and I was running on a treadmill, and a member of the church, R.J. Etzelmiller, who was a dentist, he sees me. We go to the same gym. He sees me running on a treadmill, and he goes, "Tell you what," he goes, "You're running." And I thought at first he was kidding. He's like, "Looks like you know what you're doing." I'm like, "Does it?" And he said, "I will pay your way entirely for the Chicago Marathon." He said, "Don't answer me today. You have 2 weeks to answer me. I will pay your way entirely the Chicago Marathon if you'll run it." I said, "I don't need to wait." Sure. Single, it's Nebraska.
Okay.
As well run. And so trained and did it. It was because he called me out on a when I was running on a treadmill.
What was your time?
3 minutes, 3 hours, 3 minutes. 3 hours, 57 minutes and 58 seconds.
That's pretty good. That's about 9-minute mile. That's pretty good.
I was trying to beat 4 hours, and those last couple miles, man, that everything hurts. It's brutal. So I didn't know this when why are we talking about this? So I was wearing a white shirt, and I didn't know this, but my nipples started bleeding. And when you run,
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
and the blood like all the way down, and I had no idea. So at the end, I'm like, and you have everything hurts, but you have the endorphin rush. I'm like, hey, everybody, like, this is great, whatever. And they're all looking at me funny. I'm like, we ran a marathon. Like, what's weird? And then like, it wasn't until I got back to the hotel and looked down. I'm like, oh, so I'm that guy.
What year did you run?
09. It was 2 weeks.
Recent.
I ran the marathon, and then 2 weeks later, Alyssa and I hooked up
Oh.
on Facebook. Not hooked up. We're legit. We reconnected. Technically reconnected. Yeah, what years did you guys run?
81, 82, and 40th. What was that? Would have been? I've been 95.
So how many people ran it in the 80s? Because marathons have gotten a lot more popular.
I ran in 81. I ran a 3:30.
Well, how many you ran?
And there was about 6,500.
You ran a 3:30. So does that qualified for Boston then?
No, yeah, it was a 250 for Boston.
Really?
Yeah, at that time, yeah, I ran a 3:30, but I was about. My hair was a lot thicker. My waist was a lot thinner back then too. So the last time we ran it, maybe 20,000. We actually were in Chicago to take a train during marathon day. We happened to be accidental, and there were like 35,000 people, and it went on forever. And we were there, right? The train station is right in front of there as part of the route, about halfway.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, you got the runners and you got the kind of half doing it, and you got the walkers, but people were still encouraging to that whole.
But we were there cheering for him too,
Oh, yeah.
because we knew
You know
what
what
it was. We were like, yeah, go.
It's a great experience. What RJ did to convince me, he also said something to me that he's like, you do this, it's something no one can ever take away from you. And that's true. So
That's cool.
run a marathon. I don't know. I mean, it was weird. After that, I waited. You're supposed to wait a week till you run again because your body's like, you tried to kill us. And then I got back on a treadmill thinking I'll just run for an hour or 2 hours, like whatever. Like back then, that was no big deal. And I got on the treadmill and I'm like, my body's like, nope, you're not doing this. Physically you could, but mentally I'm like, no. And it's been a struggle ever since to get back into running, ever since that near-death experience. But no, 3 times, that's impressive. And 3:30, that's fast.
That's another world ago.
Well, all right.
All right.
Fred and I are done talking about marathons, so we're done here.
And football.
Yeah.
Bears.
All right.